Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here on this kind of mystical, magical morning. I've been enjoying these trees swaying outside of the windows. We have a part of the farm at the Everett Farmers Market today, and I admit there's a little part of me that's just happy to be relaxed and in this sanctuary right now and not outside. When I tune into this topic, into the reading that Jacob just read, in my head, the perfect Sunday service would be for us to chant for 30 minutes and meditate for an hour and go off on our way. But that's not really what I'm given this morning, so I'm going to just start with what makes the most sense to me, which is these words from Master, from Whispers from Eternity. This is demand to travel by the one highway of realization. Our one Father, we are traveling by many true paths toward thy one abode of light. Show us the one highway of common realization, where all bypaths of theological beliefs meet. Make us feel that the diverse religions are branches of thy one tree of truth. Bless us that we enjoy the intuition-tested, ripe, luscious fruits of self-knowledge hanging from the many branches of true scriptural teachings. In thy one temple of silence we all sing to thee a chorus of many-voiced religions. Teach us to chant in harmony with thy love's manifold expressions, that our chorus of souls rouse thee to break thy vow of cosmic silence and lift us onto thy lap of universal, immortal understanding. One aspect of that reading that's extremely sweet is that he writes it as we and us. And he includes all of us in that way when we read that he wasn't just speaking of himself, that highway of realization was something he was holding out there for each one of us. And I think it's an important thing for us to remember when we make the choice to come into a place and a space like this, is that we need to make a conscious choice every time to come back into our hearts, to come back into the true purpose of life. Because we've all lived a full week up until this point. I had a full day yesterday. All of us have many things going on in our lives, and that's okay. That is what God has given each one of us. But if we don't make the choice to consciously come back to what's important, which is God, on the day that God gives us, which is most often when we look across the world right now, Sunday morning, then when are we making the choice? I think when I tune into this idea of worship, it's a little bit of a foreign concept to me. I grew up in Missouri and have a lot of family in the Bible Belt, and there's a lot of houses of worship there. And so I think from the time I was about 12, the word worship lost some of its luster for me. I kind of started to non-identify with this idea of coming together to worship something that was usually absurd in my 12-year-old mind. But part of the role that I'm in right now is that I have to actually tune into these things, and this is the first time I've really contemplated this idea. What is it to worship? It's a very interesting thing. I started wondering, do I even worship things? Do I worship God? What am I doing? I think if we're sincere, we start to look at our lives and we start to wonder, what is it that I actually worship? It's not totally obvious sometimes, because we are mostly still imperfect on our way to perfection. I came across a really interesting story that Swami Ananda had told at the very end of his life, something I'm sure many people have heard him say, but the way he told it in this particular video really got me, because it was at the very end, maybe the last year of his life, and he said that when he came to Master, he needed to develop devotion. that he needed to learn how to worship is what we're talking about. He had a very strong mind. And so Master told him, you need to chant. Basically, stop thinking so much. Get in your heart and love God. And so Swami said I would chant as often as I could for hours at a time and just get into my heart. And I felt myself changing. I felt devotion start coming up within me. And then suddenly, I started to get this little sense of pride kick in. Oh, I'm getting devotional. I'm full of devotion. And he said the next time he saw Master, Master said to him, if you love yourself, how can you love God? I thought that's very interesting. Because for all of us, we have areas of our life that we worship, things that God has given us, that we know are from God and that we give our heart and our soul to. It can be relationships, it can be a job. Something in our life that we actually believe in is from God and we give our heart to. But what we see is as soon as we start to identify our little self in that role and develop some sense of pride, we kill the Spirit so fast, we might as well not even be doing it. Yet, if we can take those things and actually realize that they're from God, for each one of us, maybe we should take a moment and tune into what those things are in our life. What is it that God has given us that we know very consciously, we're very aware, this is from God. This is what God has given me to worship right now. And we spiritualize those things very consciously. And we see God as the sole doer, as the sole spirit that's permeating every aspect of that. Well, this is our task for our entire life, is that we start to do this. But I find that it can help if we start with those little seeds that God has given us, those little seeds of joy, those little seeds of truth that we know are true. Nobody has to tell us that this is true because I've experienced this little seed of truth. And what do we do with that seed? We should water it and give it good sunlight and take care of it and nurture it so we can grow these little seeds into this great garden of self-realization. We need to start to make these connections with what worshiping truly is, and by we, in this case, I mean I, because I, like I said, admit that this concept of worship is still a little foreign to me. I found that last night, as I tried to reflect on what I'm even going to talk about today, a prayer just kept coming into my head, and it just echoed with me the whole car ride until I fell asleep in the car. But when I woke up again, there it was, and it was just me asking God, please teach me to worship you. Please teach me to worship you. And if nothing else from today, if that's what we can all take away, is this sweetness in our own hearts to ask God to teach us how to do this, I think we will have come a long way. I know that many of you, as I look around, have been on the path longer than I, so this isn't revelation for some, but hopefully a good reminder for all. When I look at my own path and this last 10, 15 years of really coming onto a path and now finding myself up here, I can't help but notice those seeds that God put into my life that have continued to grow. And it's a very interesting thing because they weren't things that I chose at all. Many people see Haley and I and now the growing contingent of Ananda farmers on Kameno and think that we somehow chose to be farmers, but I can assure you that's not what happened. And what happened for me was that I was at a point of my life where I worshiped basically nothing. I didn't know that there was a purpose anymore. And so I started asking the universe every night, isn't there anything real in this world? Isn't there something real? How can everything be such a dream? How can nothing be real? And it was in that conversation over the course of a year or two that Divine Mother and what I believe to be Master plucked us out of the urban wasteland that we lived in and deposited us into pure nature in the Sierra Mountains. And it was here that my whole life absolutely unequivocally changed, because I started to look around and feel the presence of God in every aspect of life. In the sun, it was in the creeks that we got our water from. Everything changed and the whole world melted away. It was an amazing thing to experience. And I knew that I didn't do it. I knew what I did when I was left to my own devices. It wasn't pretty. The reason I use this example, and I've been made fun of for using this example too much, is that we need to start looking beyond the material experience of life, the sensory experience, and we need to start looking within to the spirit. And that is what happened to both of us when we were in the Sierra Mountains, is nature stopped being a material reality at all. It was one spirit, and it was so full of life and joy that I couldn't believe I never saw it before. Well, since I was a child, I should say. I couldn't believe it, that I had forgotten what nature really was. And I remember a really interesting comment was made to us when we came back down the mountain and ended up in Washington to start this farm. And someone said to me, well, you're going to have more than nature. That's just a material reality. And I was repulsed. I had forgotten that I used to think that way, that many people think that way. We need to look beyond what we think is going on from our senses and from a material sense of life, to see that underlying everything is still God's Spirit, God's joy. Even in the most difficult things, that's what we're being called to find every single time. And it's very hard to do if we are stuck in here, or if the emotions of our heart are out of control. This is why it benefits to be a yogi, because we learn to become calm. We learn to experience life as it truly is, from the source of life. I came across an interesting thing that Master said, which was that there are 4 types of people. And he said he said this in the context of anytime any one of these is out of balance, we start to forget all the things we're talking about. We forget how to worship. We forget that God is the reality. And we get swept into our little personal egos. And he said that the intellectualists who just are, we know, I don't even have to explain that, do I? The intellectualists would give you a lecture about it. They're the emotionalists. And those two, I thought, okay, so we have the thoughts and the feelings. And he said there are the dogmatists, the ones who just cling to those rules. This is how we're going to get there. And there are the liberalists who have no clear focus because they just think anything goes. And I think if we even reflect a little bit, we see all these aspects in ourselves. And that whenever one gets out of balance, we can very quickly spin out of control. So really we're trying to balance all these aspects of our nature and have a balanced approach to life, so that we can truly remember what we're doing here all the time. That's the real goal. The interesting thing about trying to hold up this ideal of self-realization that the masters hold for us, that the saints tell us is real, is that we really do have to forget ourselves in the process. Just like Master said to Swami, how can you love yourself and love God? We have to become truly nothing in ourselves. And a few years ago when Haley and I went to Spain, I had my first experience of just feeling completely nothing in myself, and it was so wonderful. And that was when we were in Segovia, Spain, at the monastery of St. John of the Cross. We climbed up into the higher terraces, and there was a little chapel with a painting of Mount Carmel. And it was all written in Spanish, very few words, but I knew I'm enough of a yogi to recognize that this wasn't an external mountain, that this is each one of us. And even so much to see that mountain peak right here on the shoulders going up to the head. And that path, that river of life that was depicted as going up the mountain said, nada, nada, nada. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And I can't explain the joy that pulsed through me in that moment, but it was amazing. And for weeks, when I tuned into that thought of nothingness, it freed the energy so it could rise up in my river of life. And it was amazing. And I went back to that last night after not thinking about that for at least 1 to 2 years. And I thought, what have I been thinking about? If not that I am nothing. This is very important. I've got to remember this. There's one other story that I kind of had come to me in my meditation last night, and I really think that this is important for us as well. As we think of worship and try to figure out what it is, it's important that we start to see everything, see that as our natural spirit unfolds in life, and we start to realize God behind everything. Worship is the natural fruit which happens, that we don't have to force it. And it can happen in very interesting ways. I thought of the story of Christ on the last night, washing the disciples' feet. And I don't ever think about that story. I don't know if I've ever thought about it. And then last night it just popped into my head that what an interesting thing for him to do. And for Peter to say, I cannot let you wash my feet. And Jesus said, you will have nothing to do with me if you don't let me wash your feet. And then he takes all of them and gathers them together and he says, I have set the example for you. This is how you should be with each other. And I thought, what an amazing example he set for the world, for the Christ incarnate, to wash the feet of his disciples on the night before he left. What an amazing thing that is. And for us to know that it's our job to look out for each other in the exact same way. It would be a little awkward if I started offering to wash your feet, but in the spirit, it's all one and the same. In the way that we live our lives, it's all one and the same. That we get to choose to look after each other and to hold each other up. And to know that our path is the same path as the saints. That all the things that we go through in our life is our opportunity to wake up now. It's not a matter of belief anymore. It's just a matter of knowing that this is what's happening and this is the direction we're going. There's really no stopping it except that little pesky ego. So we just have to remember, I am nothing. God is everything. And together we can, like Master said, travel on the one highway of self-realization. And so it's my hope that we all just continue to grow in that spirit, true spirit of worship. Worshiping God in everyone, worshiping God in our lives and in all those seeds he's given us to grow, because there is nothing else. Jai to the Guru.